And if it's okay with you, Dave, one thing that I thought we could do was while we wait for everybody to join the webinar, I had a few sort of questions to ask you, and we'll start that way, and then afterwards we can let you do your presentation, which we're all very excited about.
Absolutely. Anything you'd like to do here is good.
Well, listen, I thought it could be quite interesting since we have you, and especially since we have you for a nice amount of time. And maybe just to give a quick introduction to everybody, I'm Jorge Ramiro Monroy. I'm the managing director of EMC, and we were one of the original investors in Cassiar. The way that I was introduced to Dave was via Doug Kerwin, who, for those of you who might know him, he was the VP of Exploration at Ivanhoe. When we told him we were involved with Cassiar, he said, "Oh, you must talk to Dave," who actually had a chance to work at this project over a decade ago, I believe. I had actually been aware of you because I had read the paper that you had written regarding the orogenic belt, talking about Sheep Creek, which is one of our other properties, Barkerville and Cassiar. But I don't know if you would mind maybe giving us a little bit of your background with Cassiar, how you came to know the property, and I think it'd be quite interesting for everybody to know.
Absolutely. So I work as a consultant doing structural geology work, but I also advise a few companies. And in the late 2000s, I was approached by Richard Barkley and Michael Belay, who had founded Hawthorne Gold. Richard and Michael were also the founders of Bema Gold and Eldorado Gold historically. So this is the project that they wanted to take to their retirement stages of their career. And they'd consolidated this very large land position at Cassiar, which now the Cassiar Gold has benefited from, because this is the same position that their company, which was Hawthorne Gold, had put together. So I was intrigued by it because it's such a large land position with a lot of exploration potential. So I joined their advisory board and spent a little bit of time coming back and forth to the project, helping out the geology team. So that's my background with the project. And so when Cassiar put together their management team with Doug and Jorge and Marco and a very capable team of management, I thought it would be a nice opportunity to continue the relationship both with the team and the project itself. And so that's why we're here. So I can, some of what I'm going to show you today is from direct knowledge gained through on the ground work during that time, and then through follow up with the Cassiar Gold team over the last couple of years.
David, I think maybe for some of the people that might not be too familiar with your background, if you don't mind to share a little bit about how you got involved with, especially specifically with this concept of orogenic gold. Every time I talk to people, especially investors, and I mention your name, and not a lot of people sort of generally know you, but everybody holds you in very high esteem, sort of the industry insiders, and really speak very highly about as one of the top structural geologists. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit of your background and what attracted you to specifically orogenic gold, and maybe tell us a little bit about the paper that you wrote, which a lot of people like to reference?
Well, absolutely. But so I have an extensive background in orogenic gold, as you imply, but also in other deposit types too. But orogenic gold in particular, I commenced working on very early in my career in the Abitibi belt, and still do. I work for a lot of major clients in that area, looking at their deposits, the structural controls on their ore bodies, and also around the world. That's led to other work globally. So I've been very fortunate in having worked on a lot of very advanced projects and operating mines. So when one does that, of course, you get a very good impression of what really makes an ore body and what makes a district. And so that's, again, one of the attractions we have here, is that we have the very large district with a lot of the characteristics we see in those other belts, like in the Abitibi. So the other things that I do is I do a lot of short courses for the SEG. So, and as people always say, teaching is one of the best ways to learn.
Yeah.
And so in doing that, synthesizing all the information I've had, I've been very fortunate to be able to convey that information with permission of my clients through various societies and so forth too. So that's part of the reason why I think a lot of people know my name outside of my clients as well too. So yeah, it's been a rewarding career. It's very good.
And what about specifically with Cassiar? What similarities did you see in the project? And I understand it's geologically quite a different context, but maybe if you don't mind sharing a little bit of what attracted you to Cassiar geologically.
Some of that I'll go over in the webinar,
Yeah.
but geologically, it's much the rocks here at Cassiar are much younger than we'd get in the Abitibi and so forth. But they're similar age to other orogenic belts in North America, such as what you see in northwestern Mexico, for example, in around La Herradura mine, and also in the Mother Lode Belt, California, and other districts around the world. So these orogenic districts can form at any age in the Earth's history, but geologically they have specific conditions they form under. They're called orogenic gold because they form, as you see in the photo behind here, during orogenesis mountain building. These are periods of time when we get large scale what we call contractual deformation, where we have the collision of an island arc with a continent or a continent with a continent, and metamorphism, where the rock mass heats up, and that heating leads to deep crustal expulsion of fluid flow into shear zones in the upper part of the crust, and the formation of vein systems that are gold bearing in these environments. So what we see at Cassiar are all those same hallmarks that we see in older districts too. So these processes repeat through geological time. They're not confined to a certain period in geological time. And so we have many of those similar characteristics at Cassiar as that we do have, for example, in the Abitibi.
And then is this completely different with what you have in the Golden Triangle?
Yeah, there's some significant differences. The Golden Triangle, these would be deposits that formed in a series of islands offshore from North America during the Jurassic period, and these are deposits that we call arc-related deposits. So, like you'd see in forming the Southwest Pacific today, or in recent tertiary time in the Southwest Pacific and the island arcs there, where we have porphyry deposits, we have epithermal systems related to the volcanism associated with those arcs. When those island arcs collide with continents like North America is when we form deposits like this. And that's exactly what happened. So the Golden Triangle is Jurassic arc. It's older than what we see the mineralization here at Cassiar. Cassiar formed when that island arc associated Stikenia with those Golden Triangle deposits collided over a long period with a bunch of different episodes with North America. And one of those periods was when we had some of the oceanic rocks between the area of the island arc and North America, what we call abducted, lifted up into the mountains here in Cassiar. And so the rocks we see here, as we'll go over in the presentation, are deep water, marine, mafic volcanic rocks, which are very typical host rocks to what you see, for example, in the Abitibi or the Mother Lode Belt in California.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Dave, I think with that short conversation, why don't we formally start the webinar?
Our title is Bullish on Tauruses, Geology and Exploration of the Potential of the Cassiar Gold Project. Now, Taurus is, of course, the largest deposit within the Cassiar area that is currently known. And we hope that it is not just one Taurus, but a herd of them. So let's move into the presentation. You can see the map here of British Columbia with the Cassiar Gold Project shown in the northern part. So Cassiar Gold is one of two major projects that the Cassiar Gold Corporation has. The other one is Sheep Creek in southern BC. And both of these are similar styles of orogenic gold systems in a belt in central British Columbia. And Cassiar and Sheep Creek are both historic producers. You can see the Sheep Creek production was our third largest orogenic gold producer in BC of 750,000 ounces, quite high grades, almost half an ounce per ton, up to about 1951. So a historical producer. Cassiar produced more recently. It's more recent discoveries. In the 80s and 90s, produced about just over 315,000 ounces of gold from mines operating quite recent times. So the underground development is all fairly recent there. And also from high-grade vein systems, 10 to 20 grams per ton. So you can see the context on the right on the map here. I'll put my pointer on here, and you can see here. So here we have the Cassiar district to the north, Sheep Creek to the south. Barkerville is in the middle here. This is all part of the same belt. And in the Yukon, just off the map here, of course, the Klondike district is all part of this same sort of belt that runs all through here. Here to the southwest, we have the Golden Triangle, so we're just northeast of that. Very good infrastructure here. You can see the road system here, the connection between British Columbia and the Yukon, the main highway, is passing right through the middle of the property. So if you look at the overall setting geologically of these districts, you can see that belt here, Sheep Creek, Caribou, Barkerville, Cassiar. These are all part of an eastern belt of orogenic gold systems in British Columbia, of which there's a second belt to the west here, which is between Juno and Bridge River here. These are slightly younger. So this is the older of the two belts, and it reflects the accretion of some of the terrains, including the big terrain that you see here, Stikenia, with North America, in which these green rocks here on the right represent various different older terrains and include packages of deep marine volcanic rocks, which have been abducted during the collision of these terrains with North America. And it's during that period of collision that we formed these gold deposits during metamorphism and deformation and through this area here. So again, as I was mentioning in the introduction, this is a setting similar to what we see in orogenic gold districts in the Abitibi Belt, West Africa, Western Australia. Even though they're older, the structural styles, the geology is very similar to what we see in those areas. So as Jorge mentioned, if you want to read more about this belt, myself and Murray Allan and Craig Hart did a Geoscience BC review of these deposits about 10 years ago, which is available for free download on the internet through the Geoscience BC site. So if we zoom in now at Cassiar itself, you could just, first of all, we'll just start with the lay of the land. You can see it's a very large ground position. You can see that's 25 kilometers across. It's a huge property which contains the entire Cassiar district. You can see on here some of the prospects that are shown and the historic producers here. Some of the vein systems here in South Cassiar include the main mine, Cusack and Bain and so forth. And these are all still covered by an active mining lease. And you can see up through here, here's the Taurus deposit to the north, also has a mining permit over it as well too. Running through the middle of the property is Highway 37, which is paved. It's the main link to the Yukon from BC. And also there's a branch road here that went to the historic Cassiar town site here, which is now all being reclaimed. And the Cassiar airstrip beside it here, which drives right past and partly over the Taurus deposit. So very, very accessible area for British Columbia. There's no helicopter needed to access this property. And you can see all the roads in red here access all of the main known target areas. So very accessible project. The project has two areas, the Cassiar North area, which has the Taurus deposit, which has a fairly large resource and growing. This is an open resource, as we'll talk about later, of about 1.4 million ounces currently at 1.14 grams per ton, but that really is incremental. It's, again, a deposit that is largely open, and there are targets nearby that look just like it, which are separated by thin areas of overburden where there's no drilling. So we're very optimistic of expanding this significantly. And then the Cassiar South, where we have, instead of the lower grade bulk tonnage, we have more specific high grade veins, which is what produced that 315,000 ounces of production. So if we look geologically at the same area, you can see again, to keep that picture of the land position in your mind. You can see looking to the south from the northern part of the property, you can see again the lay of the land. There's the main mine portals to the south, Cusack and Bain. These are some of the high-grade vein systems. There's a mill site still here with its permitted tailings management facility, and the mill is what produced that 315,000 ounces. It's in good shape. It was properly taken offline by Hawthorne and is in good condition, and still permitted with the tailings management facility there. There's a 40-person camp with power and water, and here's the highway through here. So for BC, this is an incredible infrastructure. The other advantage you see is that this huge flat valley here, again, looking from the northern property southward, this is 10 kilometers across to Table Mountain on the other side. Nice flat open valley here. Here's the Taurus deposit right down in the big flat valley and a series of exploration targets around it. There's the highway and the dash line going through here. So lots of room. A lot of this area you see in the low-lying area here too. You can see that there's a little bit of a ridge here. A lot of this is just thin cover of overburden. In some areas, a little thicker in areas out here, but seen very, very little exploration, despite the fact that Taurus is right here. There's a lot of room to grow out into this valley for deposits. There's almost no drilling out here at all to the north here of the mill area and into the area by the Cassiar Road here. And then not only that, we're looking from the Lucky prospect, which the Rusty outcrops you see below you here are related to alteration associated with more veins, and we're a kilometer above the Taurus deposit here. So the one thing to keep in concept here is the vertical aspects of this system. You can see Table Mountain here. The stratigraphy is flat lying, as I'll show. So we have stacking of vein systems in all these different units here, where you can see when you're on ridges, there's mineralization all the way from the ridge top down to the valley floor in many of these areas, with prospects located all through these areas here. So very good infrastructure, lots of exploration potential. It's a good property to be exploring. Geologically, here we are. You can see the plan view where we're looking from Lucky southward before in that last slide. Here's the highway running through here. And you can see all these green rocks here are mafic volcanic rocks. So these are basalts like you'd find in Hawaii. These are the types of rocks that form the very good host to a lot of the vein systems we see in other greenstone belts like Mother Lode Belt, California, or as I mentioned, the Abitibi earlier. And what we have is this layered sequence of mafic volcanic rocks in green, and also in these blues on the ridge here, separated in this yellowy color by bands of sediments, which are fairly flat lying. And these purple areas include gabbroic rocks and ultramafic rocks, which are all typical components of these sort of deep water mafic volcanic sequences. And these rocks form this interlayered sequence, compositionally different units. So these iron-rich mafic volcanic rocks are very good hosts for deposits like Taurus, which have a lot of pyrite, and the pyrite forms due to the sulfidation of the iron in the mafic volcanic rocks. So it's a very chemically favorable host, but it's also a very what we'd call rheologically favorable host, in that these rocks are competent. When they fracture, they allow the formation of veins, where we have these weaker units, such as sediments here, acting during the regional deformation as what we call ductile shear zones, which actually control displacement and allow the veins to open due to displacement along the shear zones. They also form conduits for the fluid flow that introduce gold into these vein systems. So this whole area here is called the Sylvester Allochthon, is a portion of what we call the Slide Mountain ophiolitic terrain, which again is a sliver of oceanic crust that was elevated here into the Cassiar Mountains due to the collision of some of the terrains in the early Cretaceous with North America, or in the mid-Cretaceous North America. So the Allochthon it's bounded to the east and west by the Cassiar and Cache Creek terrains, which again geologists will know well. These are limestones off to the west here, and to the southwest we have the Roxysticina, well to the southwest here, which hosts the Golden Triangle. So here's what some of these rocks look like and the importance of them. So you can see here the different units I mentioned. Here's the mafic volcanic rocks. You can see these pillow shapes here. So these formed on the seafloor. These pillows are all elongated to the northwest, and I'll get into the reason that's important in a moment. We also have what we call listwanites. These are ultramafic rocks that lie between the ultramafic rocks. They are highly magnesium rich, what we call ultramafic units that are associated with direct mantle derived magmas that form on the seafloor as dikes and sills. And these are easily altered to carbonate minerals, which you see this green color here. This is a mineral called fuchsite, which is very common in the alteration associated with a lot of orogenic gold deposits globally, where we also have similar ultramafic units nearby. And you see these rocks have a very strong foliation to them, so they're acting as ductile shear zones. Look at the difference between these. These pillared rocks are pristine. They have the beautiful pillow shapes. These ultramafic rocks are incredibly deformed with strong foliation. And as are carbonaceous sediments, which also lie in layers with these listwanites as well here too. So these two rocks, the sediments and the listwanites, together act as very weak units, which occur as panels between the mafic volcanic rocks, helping the localization of the gold deposits. So we'll look at you can see on the right here the distribution of some of the vein systems. So you can see the layering of these different units. These units in the gray color are these sediments. They are not favorable for gold. The gold occurs beneath them in these green rocks. So what we see when we get areas where we have sediments, we have potential for blind veins beneath those. And some of the veins that are historically mined you see here were traced from outcropping in the mafics to beneath those sediments. So there's a lot of room underneath these sediments for the definition of further veins. But there's also more stacking of these units where we can get additional mafic volcanics beneath what we're seeing outcropping here in additional layers below that give a vertical potential for this vein system as well. You can see how the vein systems are trending east-northeast, and they tend to align in these corridors. This is a 15-kilometer long corridor with some of the principal prospects, but you also have corridors out here. Here's Santa Teresa out here, and there's potential for additional corridors up here, and all the little red dots are prospects known through the area here. And there was historical placer mining on some of these creeks as well, including a 72-ounce nugget obtained from one of these creeks up here just off McDame Creek back in the 1800s. So a lot of potential to follow up in some of those areas. So geologically, or from a structural sense, this is how we see the distribution of the veins. This is a bit of a 3D block model, which gives you a view of what these different units look like. So the gray units are these sediments, and north is to the right here, you can see. Gray units are the sediments, which are interlayered beneath them here with this liswonite. This is these purple units, these ultramafic units. Mafic volcanic rocks in green, more liswonite, more mafic volcanic rocks. So you can see how we have this stacking of stratigraphy, and the veins in red, which you can see in one example of on the lower right, tend to form along the contacts and also particularly crossing those mafic units in these stacked units here, and this is what has been historically mined. Those veins are all aligned. If you look at these extensional veins here, and the main veins you see over here are aligned perpendicular to what we call a lineation here. You can see in the outcrop on the left, the rock is very rusty. It's altered due to that carbonate alteration. It has this jointing pattern here. Those joints are some of these are filled with quartz veins like these, and that lineation there, remember I showed you those pillowed volcanic rocks. Pillows typically form spherically, but when you get a lot of deformation during these metamorphic episodes, they start to stretch and elongate. And when they do that, they can fracture perpendicular to that lineation to form these veins. So we get an elongation of the rock mass, and the veins form perpendicular to the direction you stretch the rock mass. So you can see here, we have the veins aligned perpendicular to that lineation all through here. So this is a very classic control. We also see in other deposits in the Abitibi and other areas, and forms a very predictable kind of a structural setting and targeting that we can use to identify where the veins lie. If we then look in a cross section, looking west across the property, where the south is to the left, the north is to the right. We had that photo, we were looking from the Lucky Prospect down 10 kilometers across in the valley here. You can see this type of stacking I'm referring to, where you have the gray sedimentary units on the ridges here, and also interlayered with the mafic volcanic sequence, which is in green, and also some of these purple liswonite units in between here. There's more down in here in the valley. And so what we see is that everywhere on the property, we have in different elevations, mineralization occurring in different portions of that stratigraphy. So the mineralization just likes really the mafic volcanic rocks, particularly when it has ultramafic and sedimentary layers in between. And so we're seeing the stacking of these mineralized zones everywhere. And the known veins are in blue here. And what we've shown here is red dashed lines of hypothetical prospective targets, which in some of the recent drilling, for example, as you'll see, some of these types of targets have been intersected. We know there's more out there. Essentially, the historic mining really concentrated all of its exploration in the immediate areas of the mines. You do that when you're mining because you need to keep replenishing your resources, and there was very little exploration on other parts of the property beyond that. So here is a cross-section through the main mine area, which was some of the historical mining in what we call the Erickson mine. You can see here the layering again of the volcanic stratigraphy and the structural model we have. Essentially, these mafic volcanic rocks are again competent. They sit between these very weak units. When these deform, think of them forming sort of throwing plastically, the competent rocks in between will fracture to accommodate the deformation of the rocks around them. And this is where we form these veins. The veins occurring in the fractures in the mafic volcanic rocks, allowing the incursion of fluids bringing quartz and gold and sulfides into these areas, and also altering the host rock to this yellowy color, which is a carbonate alteration, which is of course very nice from a reclamation sense, because the carbonate tends to buffer any of the sulfides. You don't get acid mine drainage in these types of environments. It's very clean ores in these environments. You can see what some of the veins look like in this picture. Here's the Bain vein system. It was mined with about 30,000 ounces was produced from here, which has nice banded quartz vein, a couple of meters wide. It has the yellowy carbonate alteration on its margins. Here's the main mine. here with some more beautiful quartz veins, which the smaller veins can widen the mineralized areas quite a bit in some of these locations to give you broader zones of mineralization, which were historically mined here, and a sample showing some of the coarse visible gold here. A significant part of the gold out of these vein systems was free gold, just came out on gravity circuit, and the mineralization that is still remaining in some of these areas is a very similar style in the South Cassiar property, and these are the types of targets that the company continues to explore for. You can see the stacking of the veins between different units here. So if we look on the right here, this is a little block diagram now, model I should say, of the historic main mine. You can see the Jenny vein was mined in one mafic unit, which is in this unit above here. The purple is the ultramafics in between. So there was a vein system mined here. And then beneath that, there were more veins below. So there's that stacking we're talking about. This is directly known from the historical mining in the area. If you look on the left, you can see in the red are the known veins that were mined historically or explored historically. There was no production here. So in the gray color, we can see the distribution of the drill holes. And notice how the drilling is very, very focused to the area of historically mined veins. And remember, a lot of this area is covered by sediment. So a lot of these areas down here, there's no drilling, not because there's no potential, it's just because there was no outcropping mineralization in a lot of these areas. So there's very high potential to look at periodicity. You can see how these veins are spaced. Have a vein here in the Bain vein system, and then up to Cusack, we have a few hundred meters apart, and there's potential for stepping of these vein systems between these deposits all through here, and also potential to the east of the main mine and these areas out here where the topography gets a little higher and the veins go under the ridge here. And there's prospects all the way over to the east here. The Volog vein has a strike length of almost 5 kilometers in this area. So it's a very, some of these veins do have very long strike potential to them. Illustrating some of the potential, this news release came out this morning. This is in the main mine, so you can see some of the historical workings here with the Rari vein, the Maura vein, and you can see in this area, 260 meters from the Rory vein, some of the drilling the company just reported intercepted these very broad areas of mineralization in these drill holes. You can see there's over 100-meter thickness of a sporadic mineralization all the way through here, of which there aren't what we would have as the same grades historically were mined, but what we're seeing here is veins with visible gold in them, huge areas of quartz vein development. This is a prospective area for new veins to be present, like the ones historically mined, where we could be very close to the tip of or lateral to a new vein system in an area that has not really been drill tested before. You can see very intense quartz veining here, extremely encouraging. There's some good or reasonable gold grades here. They're not the same grades that were historically mined, but as I mentioned, the target here is not for this bulk tonnage mineralization in this area. It's for these high-grade veins, which when you start to see visible gold in these types of veins that we've intersected here, there's a good chance that these could become very similar in style to the ones you have over here. So it just shows that testing in these untested areas close by are illustrating really the potential of strong potential of additional vein systems to be present in this area. If you look now further south of the Bain vein system, so a portion of the Bain vein system produced 24,000 ounces of gold here at an average grade of, that's the recovered grade of 13.7 grams per ton over about a 2-year period. Here's looking into one of the historic stopes, and here's a sample in the lower left of some of the coarse gold associated with that vein system. The eastern part of Bain has not been mined, and you can see some of the intercepts on the right here. There's some quite high grade intercepts that's a tabulation of some of those intercepts in the unmined areas, including drilling that Cassiar Gold did in 2021 with 4.7 meters at 35 grams, 6.3 meters at 12 grams, 2.4 meters at 11.89 grams. So these are all very similar to the historically mined grades in through here, and show that the East Bain vein system, which is very close to underground workings, which I'll show you on here, has the potential to produce similar sort of sizes as some of these historic mines in the area. You can see there's a 540 meter long mineralized trend, of which a lot of those intercepts are obtained. You can see some of the key intercepts shown in here. The Hawthorne Gold, the predecessor to Cassiar, one of its predecessors, was driving a decline downward from the portal you see on the upper right towards East Bain with the idea to recommence mining and put it through the mill on the property there and reach within about 50 meters of the East Bain vein system. That portal is still all open. You can walk down the decline. It's in good condition, could be rehabilitated relatively easily, and for the potential to re-access that area for potentially infill drilling or future mining if it is considered. So the company is a huge step ahead in really bringing these things forward, given the infrastructure and the previous drilling in some of these areas. You can see here, this is a longitudinal section of the vein. So we're looking at basically along it. See, this is a cross section of it here in the lower right. So it's very typical of the setting of other vein systems at Cassiar, where we have in purple this listonite ultramafic unit and the vein system splaying off beneath it in the mafic volcanics, nice competent host rocks in beneath here. So good mining conditions in these types of rocks, very competent and carbonate altered. So we're looking right into the longitudinal section of the vein here on the left. And you can see how the vein sits beneath in purple, that listonite unit. And there's an intercept that was just obtained this year, 2.16 meters or 32 grams per ton, which looks to lie in the footwall of the main vein. It's a separate intercept. It might either be an offset or actually an en-echelon step of that vein. There's a photo of some of the quartz with visible gold in it here. So what's the potential here? You can see here's the different vein systems we have in Cassiar South that were historically mined, with the drilling very focused around the workings. And the purple dashed lines, so sort of conceptual ideas for potential periodicity of these veins, which could lie underneath areas of overburden being lithologic overburden in this case. These sediments, you can see here is a cross section shown from the main mine to Cusack and Bain, so it's cut right through the middle here, showing the sediments sitting on the ridgetop in between. And that gap in between there is not an area of lack of mineralization, it's an area of lack of drilling, because you have these sediments sitting on the top here. So there is the potential to go lateral to that, where the topography is a little lower, and drill under those sediments to look for more vein systems which could lie in between and through here. And here's the concept of targeting too, with the stacking of veins in the upper left. You can see again as a cross section with Bain to the Cusack vein system, so cross section through to the central area here, with potential lies not only in, of course, defining extensions of these historically known veins, including East Bain, which is unmined, but also for veins that may lie in between, in these blind areas in between, and also for stacking of vein systems into the next mafic unit that lies beneath a band of sediments here, which is acting essentially as a shear zone and through here. So a lot of room for stacking, three-dimensional component of these deposits here. So if we move north now, that was we had a good review of the Cassiar South. There's also other targets like Hunter Teresa, about 8 kilometers southeast, is similar style. But we move north here, and this mineralization style in the area around Taurus changes a little bit. You see Taurus in plan view here. It's a much more bulk style zone. So the area in the reddish color is the outline of the 2022 resource model, which is a 43101 report, which you can look at, and that incorporated all the drilling up to the end of 2021. And you can see the outline of the mineralization here. So this mineralization outline defines a broad bulk zone. We'll just show you the resource in a moment here. But the shape of it, you can see, is defined largely by the placement of the drill holes. You can see beyond this is very little drilling. And the reason why there isn't much drilling is it goes back to the land position in the 1990s when most of this drilling was done for Hawthorne Gold consolidated the area. And so that shape is largely dictated by the ground position that International Taurus and Cypress Minerals had back in the 1990s. So a lot of that mineralization is open. So you can see on the lower left here, nice lay of the land. You can see where disturbance for some of the drilling lines is here. Very flat terrain in through here. It's very easily accessible. You can see the road to Cassiar here running right through the northern part of the deposit area. So very easy to get to. And the other thing you'll note here on the diagram on the right is you look at the scale in the lower right there, that's 500 meters. a lot of these holes here, you can see on the left here, are very widely spaced, over 100 meters apart, single holes in these areas. So there's a lot of room to grow to extend mineralization even internal to the resource. And that was one of the things that the company focused on initially. But you can also see the stepping out in many of these holes. These are 2022 drill holes shown on here, and also stepping out to some of the targets to the east here. In this area too, the historic Taurus mine back in the 1980s produced 35,000 ounces of gold at 3.8 grams per ton from a small mill that was right on site here. And so it really forms a good bulk sample of the mineralization here at Taurus. So let's look at what the mineralization style looks like. Again, it's more of a bulk zone than we see in South Cassiar, but it's still the same host rock. So we're looking at plan view. The plan view is almost a geological map because it's almost all mafic volcanics outcropping in this flat lying area. So here we see some of the examples of the mineralization at Taurus. So unlike South Cassiar, we have thick continuous veins. Here we have lots of sheeted sets of tightly spaced veins that you can see here. They're small quartz veins in between which the host rock here is quite rusty and outcrop when it oxidizes. That's due to the iron carbonate alteration oxidizing, and also some of the pyrite that's present. You can see here is an example of a vein here in the lower right, which has an envelope of coarse pyrite on its margin. So both the pyrite and the veins themselves carry gold. The gold you can see in some of the veins we have visible gold in some of these veins here, but also too there's very fine grained gold within some of that pyrite as well too. So there's the combination of those two sources of gold here in the Taurus deposit. The veins here you can see form these corridors. There's historic exploration drift, which didn't go in too far, but you can see the sheeted sets of veins here in the rusty rock. Taurus has nice visual changes in alteration where you can see the iron carbonate alteration with the mineralization grading outward into more chlorite-bearing mafic volcanics. So it's a very visual mineralized area. So that really helps for the modeling of the deposit. You can track out the alteration. You can track out, we know the orientations of the veins, and they're east-northeast trending typically, sometimes west-northwest in different domains in the deposit. But you can track these domains out, and part of the infill drilling has looked to tracking these corridors and extending higher grade intercepts between drill holes where they couldn't be linked before along some of these corridors. So there's a lot of room, as I mentioned, in Taurus itself, in the resource itself, for upgrading that resource for basically linking higher grade continuity internal to the deposit. And I think that's a type of upgrading that a lot of people underappreciate when they drill a deposit off very widely spaced drilling. They get a big resource. If you can't track out the high grade, you're actually often underselling yourself because it's the high grade that really makes the economics of a deposit. And that is the potential here. So you can see here's establishing some of that high grade continuity inside the deposit. This hawthorn stripped off an area you can see almost 100 meters along here where it exposed some of these veins and shear zones. Here you can see there's a nice rusty shear zone and outcrop. That photo was taken in the middle here of this stripped area. So this is a geological map of that stripped area. You can see the pinky colors here are all the very intense areas of carbonate alteration with lots of sheeted sets of veins. And you can see some of the bigger veins shown in red here along these shear zones. So they're forming these northwest trending corridors in the Sable area, and you can see the splaying of these veins with east-northeast trends, which characterize the other parts of the deposit in through here. We talked about that lineation, how it controlled the deposits on the property scale. Well, that's the orientation here locally, and it's perpendicular to these veins. The veins here you can see in the lower right often have fibers of carbonate, sometimes tourmaline, parallel to that lineation. So that gives it that structural link back. That structural control is consistent through the area and a reason for why these veins are forming in these orientations. So looking at the alteration and the vein density allows you to track a lot of these zones out beyond just the gold grade. So it gives you a higher confidence level in tracking out the mineralization. And again, here's a photo of in one of the trenches here of visible gold in the veins. We also get tetrahedrite in the veins. This is a copper antimony mineral here, common to a lot of what we call epizonal orogenic gold deposits, which Cassiar is a variation on. Now looking at the distribution of mineralization, In 2020 and 2021, the company did drilling to really try and do what I was suggesting there, was to try and track out continuity inside the deposit. Again, you can see the very wide spacing of some of these drill holes here. That's 100 meters. A lot of these holes are very widely spaced here. And a lot of the gaps in the drilling you see here are not, again, due to mineralization not being present, but due to just the wide nature of the drill holes. So that was part of the objectives for the 2020 and 2021 programs. And you can see here some of the 2021 drilling intercepts, some very nice intercepts here, establishing that continuity and getting some nice length of mineralization, 45 meters at 2.4 grams here, for example, 13 meters at 3.5, 23 at 3.5. These are all in news releases on the company website, so you can look. But what it shows is that, you know, these are all above resource grades here, that again, by doing some of this approach, you can really upgrade some of the mineralization in the deposit in its continuity and dimensions and grade itself. So in 2022, on the basis of that drilling in the historical holes, the company released a 43-1 compliant resource with a cutoff grade of 0.5 gram per ton, with 37.9 million tons in it at 1.14 grams per ton for just under 1.4 million ounces. So very nice resource base here with mineralization that is very close to surface. You can see it's outcropping. I show you the strip areas. Here's a cross section across the deposit. You can see most of that mineralization lies within 150 meters of surface. It's a perfect geometry for an open pit type scenario in the deposit here. And if you look at in the plan view on the left of the distribution of mineralization, that trench I showed you was just down here. That's that west-northwest trend, the sable area. So you can see how that's incorporated into the shapes in the resource model. And then the east-northeast trends are associated with veins in trenches here. So we can actually see these things outcropping. There's good confidence level over the distribution of some of these. But look at these dots here. This is the spotted dog effect, which you don't really like to see in a resource because it's showing you that this usually just one or two drill holes in those spots there. And then these are gaps in between. So these areas in between really need infilling, and that's again part of the programs the company have been doing. But also too, all this mineralization is open around, particularly in the southeast here, parts of the north here, and over towards the historical Taurus mine. Mineralization is open around the Taurus mine, and as I'll show you, there's some targets that were drilled here around Wings Canyon to the south here and into the east here, which all hit mineralization as well. So there's a lot of room to grow this mineralization here. Just very thin overburden cover over a lot of these areas. I know on these ridges to the right here, you can see the topography. There's outcropping carbonate alteration with veins in it, having walked over those areas with very little drilling in those areas. So lots and lots of room to grow in this deposit. The other feature to note here is this Taurus West Fault. So this structure here is a syn mineralization structure. It's a ductile shear zone with a lot of veins along it. You can see how some of the vein mineralization is forming around it. It's a north trending moderate east deepening feature. And there's another one out here around Wings Canyon, which you'll see on the other maps, which also looks to control mineralization there. And so these types of structures help host some high grade plunging ore shoots. When I say high grade, is for this deposit, sort of plus 1.5, 2 gram per ton material in these south plunging zones here, which can be tracked out. And this pod you see here, and I'm circling, which is part of this one here, is open to the south. So that is mineralization that the company plans to continue drilling this year. Here's some of the mineralization associated with the Taurus West Fault, disseminated pyrite with carbonate alteration in the upper left. This is similar to the Bonanza Ledge zone, for example, at Barkerville. And in the upper right here, here's the shear zone associated with it. So here's some examples of some of the how the impact some of this drilling can have on the Taurus resource. You can see on the left here is a cross section showing some of the block model from the resource, the widely spaced holes. And you can see these 2022 drill holes, like this one here, which is 176, is in a gap. And you can see, look at the long intervals here, 98 meters at 1.28 grams. This kind of intercept can very substantially increase the volume of the mineralization in these areas and is not incorporated into the resource at this stage. So this is where a lot of the potential lies inside the deposit for these kinds of areas like this. In 2022, here's some of the drilling which is not incorporated in the resource. You can see, again, similar types of intervals that were obtained before. And a lot of these are either holes between historical holes or step out holes to the south and east in different parts of the deposit. And you can see, again, similar types of intervals to what we see in the resources, 71 meters at 1.5 grams. This higher grade intervals, 10.5 meters, 4.47 grams. Usually when you see grades above about 3 grams, you'll start to see visible gold as little grains within some of those quartz veins associated with mineralization. So this is all new drilling that could be incorporated in future resource iterations. And more examples of exploration potential. You can see again here on the western part of the Taurus deposit, some of the 2022 intercepts that's been recently released, and you can see how they lie with the block model. In a lot of these intercepts are lying in areas that really were not covered by the block model at all. 71.6 meters, 1.5 grams, for example, is totally outside the block model. There's a nice broad intercept here, which helps expand some of this plunging ore shoot along the Taurus West Fault to the south, with 12.8 meters at 2 grams in it and 58 meters at 1.34 grams per ton is the broader interval that lies within. So there's a lot of room to grow, as I say, in these areas and step out holes. So we're going to now look at the Taurus East here, some of the exploration potential. You can see Taurus, the historic Taurus mine was not included in the 2022 resource because of some uncertainties of some of the historic stopes there. But now some of that is better resolved, and future resources will include some of this area. But that's the orange is still nonetheless the outline that was done for a block model in that area, which was not included because of those uncertainties, but it shows you the shapes there. And some of the drilling in 2022, you can see the holes here in the upper right. These are in the northern part here, an area that really has very limited drill testing. You can see these intercepts, 13.7 meters at 2 grams per ton, 22 meters at 1.5 grams per ton in a steeply dipping zone that lies out here, open completely to the east. Similarly down here, Wings Canyon area, there's been long intercepts historically in this area of tens of meters at half to a gram per ton. And you can see here some of the intervals from 2022, 41.6 meters at 0.6 grams, 23 meters at 0.92 grams. Again, very similar styles to Taurus. Very little drilling in this area and no drilling in between Taurus and this target area, thin cover over that area, and very, very limited drilling to the east. So the east out here, this creek here has placer mining all along it. And there's lots of potential that lies to the east in all of these areas. As to the west and to the south, it's actually a lot of exploration targets, areas around here. So here's Wings Canyon, which I was just mentioned. You can see incredible quartz veins along that. There's a north-south trending fault there that helps control some of these vein systems. Some of the other target areas around here that look like Taurus, you can see Snow Creek. There's a geologist standing there. Look at all the sheeted veins with the rusty carbonate alteration around. That area lies several kilometers to the northeast of Taurus, up a creek here, which is part of the potential source of all this placer that came out of this creek system here. So it's again showing very, very similar styles to Taurus mineralization. Only a very little bit of limited drilling on the ridge above it in the 1980s, which did hit mineralization, but again it was a very fractured ground position then, and there wasn't any consolidation of it. So there's minimal exploration in these areas. So lots of room to grow out to the east here. You can see the Lucky prospect where we looked from the slide before. There's the Taurus deposit in the valley below, so we're looking to the south. There's Lucky in the upper left here. And you can see the veins outcropping at Lucky, some high-grade gold-bearing and silver-bearing veins in this area with tetrahedrite in them, which have similarities to the Cassiar South area. So more targets up on the ridge top here, which have also seen very limited testing in these areas too. So lots of room in some of those areas. So overall, just in summarizing, you can see here's we have a very clear exploration targeting concept for the project because the structural controls are so clear on the property. Lots of different targets for stack mineralization, lateral extensions, and targets in new areas. You can see in the lower right, this is the Hunter Teresa target area, about 8 kilometers east-southeast of the main mine. Very limited testing there. Vein systems, which are just like what we see in the main mine with some visible gold along them. And these also extend underneath some of those sediments around there too. So again, shows us the potential for other trends in the area as well too. And there's the planned exploration that the company is intending to do in 2023 with about another 20,000 meters of drilling with significant focus around expanding Taurus about 10,000 meters there. Cassiar South to look for some of these blind parallel vein systems, vertical stacking in the stratigraphy, and also potentially 5,000 meters or so in outlying targets, which could include a helicopter-based component to get to some of these target areas like you saw at Snow Creek and Lucky and other areas like this. And New Coast is another target too. And then associated with that, mapping and sampling to really to try and do first pass level evaluation, some of these very far outlying targets. IP survey over central portions of the property is proposed, and currently looking at getting permitting for that. And also some of the research looking at geological domaining at Taurus, petrology work, looking at some metallurgical aspects of it. There are some portions of the western part of the deposit that historically did not get great recoveries. So we want to just look and see in those very preliminary styles of metallurgy if there's other ways to look at that, and look to, for example, if a fine grind, for example, of the mineralization is what is needed to help that in that area. But the rest of the deposit had the bulk sample from the historic Taurus mine, which showed quite good recoveries. So those are some of the plans for 2023. And the company also has on its radar too, of course, the Sheep Creek project, which is in southern BC with the historical production I mentioned earlier in the talk, but very limited exploration since the 1950s. Very similar styles of mineralization to what we have at Cassiar. And here's a plan view of Sheep Creek from the report I did with Marie Allan and Craig Hart. And you can see here is the Sheep Creek district. Again, just like Cassiar, east-northeast trending veins. Here's some of them in the underground. You can see some samples here. And these also have very discrete controls. Here in longitudinal section of some of these veins, you can see how they're controlled by the positions of folds in this quartzite bearing stratigraphy here. So again, very discrete structural controls, a lot of similarities in the styles to what we see at Cassiar, some differences, but very clear sort of targeting concepts for this area. So the company can be looking at evaluating these types of targets as well. And that's my presentation. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Nowadays, people talk about the term district scale. Every company has a mention of that in their presentation. What does it mean for Cassiar when you talk about a district scale, and what kind of initiatives are being taken by the company to explore the potential, for instance, for any different styles of mineralizations or potentially different commodities?
Yeah, that's a good question. So district scale, obviously, in this case, the company has a property position which encompasses truly an entire district. So we have a district where we have a cluster of mineralization. So the district being obviously the concentration of the common styles of mineralization in the area around a historical, in this case, placer producing area. So in this case, we have the 25 by 25 kilometer size of the property encompasses truly a district. A lot of people who talk about district scale have much smaller land positions and may be scattered. In this case, you have the whole continuity of it, which has a real advantage. The other advantage for having that land position is as we talked about, the whole concept of the different types of targets, from the stacking to the parallel trends, which we can apply to different parts of the district for those styles of mineralization we're aware of, such as the high grade veins and the Taurus styles in different areas. But as noted by the person asking the question, there is also potential for other mineralization in the area. And on the very western and eastern parts of the property, where we get into the different terrains, the Cache Creek on the one side and the Cassiar on the other, there is also carbonate bearing units where there is a potential for carbonate replacement deposits and Mississippi Valley style mineralization like Silvertip, which lies not too far away. The other thing of interest in this region is that, as I mentioned, sorry, go ahead.
Which region is that? The one sort of
to the east, yeah, yeah. That Silvertip is to the northeast of, and so that's a core mining. It's a silver rich, base metal rich replacement deposit. And the other style of potential for mineralization here, which the company really has not done much evaluation of, and I think needs further work on, is that these ultramafic rocks that occur in these environments here have the potential for magmatic nickel mineralization in them as well. So in FPX Resources, for example,
Oh
has
yeah.
mineralization in rocks of similar style in the region. So there is also the potential for nickel mineralization. When you get these types of belts, often orogenic gold systems occur in areas where there can be nickel mineralization as well, as you see in the Abitibi, as you see in the Western Australian Kambalda and other areas too. So there is potential for multiple commodities on the property, and those are really just in very early stages of evaluation. There are prospects that are base metal bearing on in western parts of the property, for example.
What's your view on Cassiar South? Are there any indications for a larger high grade resource there, or is it too early to tell?
Well, at Cassiar South, I view it very much like what we see in some of the other Abitibi deposits. When you read about, for example, a historic producer like the Hollinger McIntyre deposit in Timmins, or some of these other deposits that have produced significant gold over their times, is they're not made up of just one vein. They're made up of dozens and dozens of veins. Each one can carry tens of thousands of ounces. And in Cassiar, the distribution of mineralization is very similar to that. Just the nature of the closely spaced high grade veins allows you to have potential for multiple veins with different working headings in each one of these, if you were to discover multiple ones in a cluster. And I think that's the highest potential lies. Geologically, I don't think you'd have the potential for a huge through-going vein that's going to go vertically for kilometers, just because, in part, the nature of the stratigraphy, it's tilted. But there is a good potential for very good strike length along some of these vein systems, like was demonstrated at Volag, which is several kilometers long. And the New Coast target, which I didn't really talk much about, but there's mineralization along that beneath one of those ultramafic units that's being tested by very widely spaced single holes over a strike length of about 3 to 4 kilometers. So these the potential lies in lateral continuity of some of these longer veins, but also in clustered sets of these veins, and obviously in the bulk tonnage of the deposits such as Taurus, rather than huge through-going veins like you might think of it like at Braylorn, where some of the vein systems went to 2 kilometers depth. Here, you still could have mineralization going over a great vertical extent, but in one vein set, and then a gap with the shear zone in between, another vein set. So there is potential for the vertical mineralization that is stacked rather than directly continuous in a lot of these areas.
From this drill campaign, how would you characterize the results? Do you feel like you've reached the goals that you set out at the beginning? Were there any questions that you had asked the rocks, and were those questions answered? And what are you looking forward in the next round of drilling?
Good questions. I think the 2022 program achieved what the objectives were, and as you saw from the results around Taurus, the step out holes and the infill holes really showed that in those gaps, for example, in between some of the resource blocks, that there is continuity of mineralization. We already had indications of that from the geology, as I mentioned before. That's part of the reason the placement of the holes is using the geological understanding to say, hey, we know we have continuity of veins in this orientation. The resource blocks are spaced, infilled to try and understand that continuity, shorten those interpolation distances so we can actually join things up. So that was I think quite successful in the Taurus deposit. The drilling on the outside of the Taurus deposit, like for the example to the east, clearly showed additional areas of mineralization that were never identified before. There was no drilling in a lot of these areas, yet we're hitting mineralization. So the continuing hit ratio around Taurus, even in step out holes, remains. And there's no obvious restrictions yet on the distribution of that system from the sense of the sort of property scale. So I think the Taurus mineralization for looking for additional tori certainly achieved its objectives. Cassiar South, as just the nature of the veins, of course, we have high risk, high reward, because there the potential hit ratio is much lower just because of the nature of the distribution of the veins. Of course, if you tag into a new vein and you start drilling it off, you're going to have a hit in every hole. But to achieve that, of course, with the wide spacing of those veins, often the position underneath some of these units, you really have to have faith in these, in that you're going to get a lower ratio of intersections in those areas than you would, let's say, at Taurus. So I think within that perspective, yes, I think the program was successful. I was very impressed, for example, and I know the whole team was excited about the hits in the main mine area I showed you, with some of the visible gold that was released this morning. That's a big area of alteration. It's very impressive. Wow. And we have gold in there with visible gold. So that's the kind of area that now in 2023 can follow up to track out where that goes. And similar in the Bain vein system, I mentioned there was a hit of another interval of the same grades that were mined historically, of a couple of meters at over 10 grams. And that's a big step out on the Bain vein system there, which suggests either a new step in the vein system or an offset of the vein system that had not been defined before. So I think with all of these areas, it all looks good. And in 2023, the company will continue to follow up some of those types of targets.